Hello, I'm Kata and welcome to the Walk the Valley, the podcast that breaks down barriers to bringing healthcare innovation to market. Today I'm joined by Mads Vad Kristensen, a key figure in one of Denmark's leading university innovation hubs, with a background in venture capital. We'll take a more systems perspective in this discussion, and we'll talk about why so many health tech startups get stuck in the valley of death and how founder teams, planning, funding, and system design can help prevent that fate. Mads, thank you so much for joining me today. Please, could you say a few more words about yourself and your position in the innovation ecosystem?
Thank you, Katalin, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Mads Vad Kristensen. I work at DTU SkyLab, which is our innovation hub here at the DTU, the Technical University of Denmark. I work every day trying to help researchers spin out their research in the form of new startups. So I try to help them with everything but the R&D itself, because obviously they are the experts in that. But I try to help them with everything else in trying to create a company. I've been working with helping good people build startups and businesses for 25 years or more. I've done that in a variety of different contexts. I've done it as an entrepreneur in big organizations. I've done it as being in venture capital for a while. And I've also helped really young teams basically start from a blank sheet of paper and help them basically create teams and concepts that could raise funding and mature into companies that are doing quite well today. So I have a wealth of experience, and basically my passion is to help people with ideas and insights really build something that can benefit somebody else somewhere.
So you have this passion to help people to build, and you mentioned that you used to work on helping to create teams to young startups, to emerging startups. Mm-hmm. What do you think is the most important factor to succeed for a healthcare startup?
Yeah, so I would say two things. So first of all, a really good, interesting take on a problem that really affects a lot of people, and where you have the feeling that if we could succeed doing this, then a substantial amount of people could be better off. But more importantly, I think having a really good multidisciplinary team with all the skills present, so both in terms of doing the R&D, the technology development and the clinical development, but also from a very early point also understand and work with the commercial development and how to actually get this out, because to be honest, that's where I've in the past see a lot of teams really struggle, that they kind of get towards working on this at a far too late stage, and then they run into the classical problem for a lot of health tech startups, which is basically that they run out of money. And I've seen quite a few companies in the past who have got into that unfortunate position at a point in time where they were not that far off actually making it, but they just ran out of steam before the finish line. And for various reasons, it was not possible for them to kind of raise the additional funds required to actually make it into market. And that's just a shame, because a lot of these companies have been, really good companies, in the sense that they have all been working on things that were worthwhile and that was innovative and could potentially have made a difference for people. But they just never had the chance to prove it.
Okay, so you're saying that the core competencies that we need right from the beginning is someone who's good at R&D, so the research competence, then building the tech and the clinical development. But on top of these, you already need to think about commercialization very early on. So you're saying that it's not a good idea to develop a product and then after that think about commercialization, you're saying that it needs to be done parallel.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. And it's one of the things that has always kind of intrigued me when I look at startups and how they plan their roadmaps for what to do. And that is that I have most of the time what I see, and especially if there is some really advanced tech involved, you see this classic roadmap where it's kind of like a waterfall development. We do this, and then when that is done, we do the next thing, and then the next thing, then the next thing. And while that makes sense from an R&D perspective, I think one of the biggest challenges is that if you are too kind of focused on that and that way of thinking, you run the risk of neglecting working on how to actually get this out of the lab and into the hands of customers and real people too late, right? And this is where I've always thought that this notion about also thinking about how can we work in parallel from an early point of view, a point of time, I think that is that is really, really interesting, because when you work in parallel, what you do is basically, at least theoretically, is that you both shorten the time to market because you are doing several things at once. But more importantly, you also, I think, have a better chance of actually managing your runway and your cash burn, and basically, get more out of the early funding that you are able to retract. Because I think when you talk about, from a funding perspective, the classic challenge for a lot of health tech startups is that, they start out by maybe raising a small round from some business angels or some other way of getting financed, and then they run on that for a while. And then in order to finish the job and get to market, they need to raise again, maybe 1 or 2 times. And then sometimes the challenge is that when they then go out to try and raise money, right, they run into the problem where sometimes the ones who backed them before may not have the money to follow up to the extent that is needed in order to the funding that is required, or they have just gotten other interests, and then the ones who do have the money that they could potentially invest, like the VCs of the world or more institutional investors, they will maybe not be that much into it because you haven't proven anything yet. So to them, there is just at best a whole lot of maybe promise there, but nothing that has kind of been validated or substantiated, which just for many of these VCs make it super hard to make a decision to invest. And thus, at the end of the day, the end result for the startup is that you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? Where those who believe in you don't have the funds, and those who have the funds that don't believe in you. And the end result is that you are actually not just in the valley of death, you're in kind of like what I in health tech terms typically call like the abyss of death, right? Because you're stuck at the very bottom of the ocean, and there's just no way up to get to fresh air. Until you just basically your company is dead.
Oh, this is so interesting. It sounds like we need a major mindset shift in medtech development, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
because I would imagine startup founders would want to extend their runway and burn the cash slow, so they will do like sequential development step by step. But what you're saying is, no, this is the wrong approach, because you won't be ready to secure the follow-on funding. You really need to put more cash into it in the beginning and do everything parallel. Develop the product.
Exactly.
And figure out the commercial strategy and product market fit.
Exactly. And I think one of the, when thinking a bit about it, I think one of the reasons why it goes wrong is that if you're a founder in this space and you're looking to do a funding strategy for your startup, right? When you work in health tech, it is easy to start by looking at, how are, say, life science startups funded, right? Because in life science, in drug discovery, drug development, it's super common that you have like milestones, right? Where you reach a milestone, you get new funding because everything is looking good, right? But I think what you tend to forget is that the majority of the current investors that you have within health tech are actually people who come more from a traditional tech investing background, right? Where one of the things that they are really, looking at and keen on investing in is if you got traction, right? So you go. So in essence, worst case, as a founder, when you're trying to raise, you go out with a message that resonates best with life science investors or the way of thinking. But a message that doesn't resonate at all with the actual audience that you are talking to, which are predominantly the tech investors. And there is in that space in between where you kind of understand both kind of like the development timelines and complexities in regulatory environment. And at the same time, you also understand tech, there are just not that many investors, right? Who are in that space where they kind of open towards taking a risk on this kind of more milestone based approach, right? So that is why whenever I get a chance to chat with a health tech founder team, kind of looking to start the journey, the fundraising journey, I always ask them, what would it take for you to be able to raise once before you get to market, and then when you have the first kind of customers or like, some other thing that kind of validates that there is a need and there might be traction down the line, right? Then raise again, right? So whenever I see this plan where, you have 2 or 3 fundraisers before you actually market, I always kind of raise the red flag and, ask, are you really sure that this is the right approach? Because, I've seen plenty of people kind of, go down in flames by essentially doing what you're trying to do. And I'm not saying that it cannot be done. I'm just saying that it comes with excessive risk of not being able to succeed, right? So that is something that I believe that any founder in this space should be looking towards mitigating and asking yourself some hard questions before you go down that path to see, is there another kind of journey that we could kind of envision when it comes to fundraising. And just to finish that off, in order to do that, working in parallel, so you have both the R&D, regulatory, and the commercial things happening from an early point of time, I think is absolutely key towards building that alternative funding journey that would actually fit more with the investor landscape that you have out there than the other way around.
This is some really interesting strategy insight here for founders. If we zoom out a little bit, in the initial stages and when you're going through the valley of death with your product or company, there's a lot of infrastructure and support system around you that you can tap into. We have incubators, accelerators, networking events, trade shows, etc. But from your point of view, at the intersection of academia, innovation, and venture, what infrastructure is still missing to help health tech startups to succeed?
So in general, I think we are doing better and better. Luckily, we are in a situation where the awareness about the opportunity and the challenges in making things happen is pretty high. So good people are constantly trying to expand the ecosystem and expand the offerings and stuff like that. But I'll say, obviously, always we need access to more funding channels, more kind of risk funding, and not just like safe bet funding. So that is one. But if I were to look at like accelerators, incubators, and kind of support systems, I think one of the things that we tend to kind of not really dig deep enough into, and which is a big passion of mine, is this thing about team dynamics, right? So how do you actually build the team that has both the competence and experience, but also the stamina and the endurance and the resilience to really kind of survive real world impact once you leave kind of like the cradle and go out into the real world, right? Because oftentimes, and it doesn't matter which kind of incubation or ecosystem you're part of, oftentimes, it's a very, in the early stages, it can be a very kind of like secure environment where you have time to explore and learn, and that's all good and fine. But once you leave and you go out there in the real world, it becomes like more of what I usually call like a contact sport, right? You bump into people in various ways, challenges various ways, and sometimes you get hurt from it, right? And so the question then becomes, okay, when you then start getting the bruises and the setbacks and facing the challenges, and you find yourself with the head in the concrete wall, right? What do, right? Do you give up, right, and say, okay, this is not for me at all, or do you find ways to kind of move ahead and kind of circumvent different challenges and stuff like that? And I think a good team, like the team that has the best chances of actually making it and become a success and scaling the business and become also eventually a good exit story, right? That is the team that has the resilience to say, no, we won't let this kill us, right? And I think building those dynamics, right, and finding that right, also personal traits and competencies that goes into creating that kind of strong unit that a great founder team is. I think that is something that we could be exploring much more within the ecosystem on how to actually help with, right? Because we talk a lot about technology development, we talk about a lot about customer development and going out validating stuff, and we can do workshops from here until next Christmas. But I think we talk too little about the teams, the motivations, the psychology, the interperson dynamics, and how to really galvanize that for the journey. And we could and should, in my opinion, do a lot more about that, because I think also if we look at it from kind of like the real big picture point of view, whenever somebody or people are talking about the EU being behind the US and China on innovation and we need to do more, I actually think that fixing quote unquote that part of it, right, on the team side and how we can create these resilient teams, I think that's a really big missing piece of that puzzle. Because I think in terms of, the science, the ideas, making stuff work, I think we've got a lot of really, really, amazing talent and cool opportunities and great technologies, right? So if we can just get the execution part of it to match that, right, I think we could really, both in Denmark and like the Nordic region, but also in Europe, I think we could really have some serious juggernaut muscle.
What you're saying is what we really, really miss from the support ecosystem is to coach the founding teams in order to help them build themselves to become resilient. And there's so much science behind what are the dynamics in a winning startup funding team, but it's not really put to use. So again, there's a lot of research and insights into what a good team should be or could be.
Yeah.
But we don't use those insights enough.
No, it's sometimes it's something that most times it becomes kind of like anecdotal and something that you can you can watch a YouTube video or you can go to a networking event and hear somebody giving an inspirational talk, right? But I think what is the really interesting part is then, okay, what does that mean, right? What does that mean in terms of what are we going to do tomorrow that is going to kind of, make some of these learnings operational and actually benefit, teams in real terms? And how can we also kind of, engage with teams in more, maybe sometimes, I will not say confrontational ways, but where we really get close and we really start pushing some buttons and start testing people out. Sometimes I kind of compare it to, if you are a center or an auditor at an exam, right? And you see a really, really crappy paper, right, where you just know that this student who did that could do a lot better, right? The reason why you want to go flunk that paper is that you want to say, okay, congratulations, you now have an opportunity to learn and redo this in a proper way, right? So you kind of learn and get kind of like the first heavy contact while you're still in a kind of learning environment, so that, when you go out into the real world, you won't actually get hurt, right? Because you will have learned what it actually means to kind of make it. And I think having that same ambition to actually engage with people and and maybe sometime, question, what is your motivation behind want to do this? Are you really sure? Really digging deep. I think that could really make a lot of difference for a lot of people. And maybe in some instances, some people will say, okay, maybe doing a startup is not for me, but then you could kind of make the argument then, okay, would you just then have realized that at a later point anyway? Mm-hmm. So we actually help you get kind of clarity about it and what you're in for, so that you can make, quote unquote, like an informed decision on becoming a founder much earlier. Mm-hmm. So and I think that's some ideas that are worth exploring, or at least discussing whether they kind of would make sense to kind of do more of, instead of in most times just basically relying on teams figuring this out for themselves. Mm-hmm. Because obviously, at the end of the day, it's their responsibility. They are a team. They need to make things work together, right? But, sometimes maybe there is just a bit too much an element in terms of praying for luck, right? Where you could actually have worked maybe to help reduce some of that need for luck, so to say, right? So long answer to a super interesting question. And this is a huge passion area of mine. That is the team, because ultimately it all comes down to the people, and I'm in total awe of everybody who wants to go on this journey and really wants to explore into building something that can benefit people. So that's why I'm personally so preoccupied by say, okay, how can I in my work hopefully help in the best possible way to increase your chances, or the team's chances, that it will be successful once it gets out there and where it really counts.
Mm-hmm. And as the startup evolves, the team also needs to evolve. So people will eventually change in a team, and you as a founder need to accept that you can't hold on to the same people all the time, unless you make an effort to really keep someone who's strategically very important.
100%, and I think one of the many joys of what I am fortunate enough to do every day is that, of course, I engage with a lot of teams, a lot of early stage founders, and the cool thing here is that when we have these discussions, like they all get it, right? They all understand, when we have the chats about what is actually needed, that there may be a point in time going forward where, yes, you will need to onboard new people. Of course you will. When you grow successfully, you need to grow the team. But maybe you also need to take up a different position yourself and kind of make room for somebody else to come in and do some of the stuff that you did early on.
Exactly.
Right? And
we talked about in a previous episode that as a founder, like, you need to be prepared for this, that eventually you're not going to be the one who's steering the ship.
100%. And it was funny because I remember a couple of years ago at a conference, I had a conversation with a headhunter, and he said to me, and I was actually really surprised by this. He said that it was not uncommon that, for instance, for say like not so much a health tech, but if you were like in life science or biotech or something like that, that when the company actually, eventually IPO'd or got sold, it was on its 6th CEO. That was kind of like the average. And I was like, wow, right? Because I would have imagined, okay, 2, maybe 3, if the second hire chose to be, not the right profile, right? But 6, right?
That's a lot.
So I think, if you start really digging into all these statistics, right, and start thinking about, okay, what does that then mean in terms of what you should prepare new founders for? I think there's so much, super strong data out there that we actually, we have a really full, spectrum of things that we could kind of prepare these founders for, that is not based on opinion, but it's actually based on, okay, if you just look at the data, right? This is how it is. So the only thing that we should be discussing is, okay, what does this then mean for you? and what are your reflections, your considerations, your planning around it? So like, when do you see would be the time where you would look in the mirror and say, I'm not the right one to do this particular thing anymore. Like I would probably be better in a different role, and let's bring in somebody else. So just thinking about these things, and I think in terms of, because this is also, assessing risks and doing like strategic planning, right? And I think there are so many things that today, by accident may lead, a founder team and a startup a bit off course and end, in a potentially bad place that could potentially have been avoided just by having a bit more kind of like, risk assessment and scenario planning. So actually having a plan ready for when you need it and not try to really think of it once, the shit hits the fan. Pardon my French.
Exactly like that came up in a previous interview. So you need to be prepared for when the shit hits the fan, but you need to make a plan early on.
Yeah, and that to be honest, that is the whole point, about resilience that I have, right? When you're basically, facing, a lot of challenges, a lot of headwind, right? One of the things that keeps you from just wanting to quit is that you have thought about this and you actually have a plan. It may need, some adjustment, but you're not starting from scratch. So you have a plan, something that you can take comfort in. I actually think this is like an assumption that I have, but I think it can also help reduce like founder stress, right? Just to have, I actually have something, that I can kind of lean on, for various scenarios. I have an idea about what to do. I don't need to, figure everything out in the moment, right? So I have an opportunity to better manage, and thus also, in my mind, a better opportunity to get to a good result out of a pretty, bad situation to start with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so back to the support system. DTU is involved in a program called Open Entrepreneurship. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, so Open Entrepreneurship is it's a Danish program. It's been financed by the annual state budget now, and basically the whole idea about Open Entrepreneurship is to try to bridge kind of research-driven early stage startups with experience and competencies from the outside. So let's imagine that you have made a cool invention. You've decided you want to pursue doing a startup about it. You are really technically gifted and you can do all the things, but one of these all other things that you quickly realize, and this is my experience also from researchers, and I think is super cool, is that you are very keenly aware that you know nothing about, say, for instance, commercialization, right? Then open entrepreneurship, among a lot of other things, is an opportunity to basically reach out and say, look, we are doing this. We need some help on the commercial side. Maybe we are searching for a co-founder. And then one of the things that open entrepreneurship has is that it has what is now called the e-core, which is basically quite a few people who have signed up, who have various backgrounds within various industries, who say, I could be interested in pursuing a startup opportunity here if the right one presented itself, right? So it's basically kind of like one of the many things is that they have this kind of like matchmaking ability where they can you kind of see startup meet potential co-founder. And then one of the things that we do here, and that I think they're also doing at the other universities in Denmark, is that we basically try to facilitate that meeting and try to help both teams and the external person kind of setting expectations and making sure that everything kind of happens in an orderly way. And one of the things that we are actually quite successful with is that whenever it seems like there is a match, we have this kind of like concept of a 3-month test period, where the team and this profile, they try working together, what's the chemistry like, can we make it work, does it make sense? And oftentimes those 3 months also comes with some agreed objectives, say, okay, what do we need to see after 3 months in the team and with the person? And then basically from there decide, okay, is this something that we want to pursue, like, becoming a real co-founder or advisor or what else, or do we just agree that yes, it's been interesting and fun for 3 months and that was about it? So it's a really cool and efficient way of trying to bring people together and see can we actually create this multidisciplinary team that is needed for the ongoing journey, right? And there are quite a lot of people in Denmark and really good, experienced, bright people with a lot of execution power, right? Who are, super keen on exploring joining a startup, where somebody else kind of, came up with the idea and did all the heavy lifting in terms of proving that this actually works, right? So for the startup teams that we have, the first thing in finding this co-founder for open entrepreneurship is, being able to actually sell the vision and the technology to these people, right?
But it's also about lifting world-class research out of the shell of academia, yes. Right? And putting it out into the market. Absolutely. And it's kind of a nice structured way of trying to say, okay, if we have this idea that, what is oftentimes missing from research-based startups is kind of like the more commercial angle, could this be a way where we can kind of, efficiently, quickly find potentially that missing piece of that puzzle, and then just try to connect and see what happens. And it's a super good initiative. It's been around for a few years, and now it's actually become part of the annual Danish government budget to support this. So that's only for Danish startups, or for
it's only for Danish startups. At least that's my understanding. I'm actually not sure if there's ever been, say, for instance, a startup from Lund or Malmö who have basically tried to see if they could apply. But my assumption is, and I haven't sanity checked this, but my assumption is that it's Danish only. But otherwise, I would assume that if it's not explicitly stated, by all means, try it out.
I
see what happens.
I think joining the program as a co-founder or getting on the E-Corps is okay. For that, you don't need to be based specifically in Denmark.
No. And we are always, and the teams are always open for, the right person from wherever. Because oftentimes what we also see, and especially, in the university spinouts, is that the founder teams that are forming, that the early stage teams, the technical teams, are often also based on various different nationalities anyway, right? So they are kind of born global, so to say, also team-wise.
But the projects need to come from Danish universities who are in the program, right?
Yeah. They do, and there are. I think there's a rich variety of projects, and it is something that we are, looking to scale up and do more of. I think we had earlier this year, we had our first kind of decidedly co-founder call, and I can't remember, but I think we had like 13 or 14 different teams across Danish universities all looking for a co-founder at the same time. So we did kind of like this big call and this big advertisement, say, okay, now is the opportunity if you want to, explore, this kind of a journey together with some really brilliant people, right?
Yeah. So I'd like to ask you one last question. If you could redesign the support ecosystem for early health tech startups, what's the one change you'd make?
Oh, that's a really, really, really good question. One thing only?
Just one. The most important.
Just one. I think what I would do on a foundational level, just to be maybe a bit controversial, is that I would make sure from day one, kind of do a sanity check that there is a fully, multidisciplinary team around this, where I know and I feel confident that from day one, they understand not only the technology and the problem they're trying to solve, but also what it actually will take to get it into market. And then basically say, if you don't understand this or you don't recognize it, then maybe you need to wait until you do in order to get the support. Because, at the end of the day, these requirements, this level of really kind of seriousness, quote unquote, about what you're trying to do, I think they're going to be necessary anyway further on the journey. And I think sometimes it could be interesting just to ask yourself, does it really make a lot of sense to spend a lot of time and resources trying to help somebody or work with somebody who doesn't really understand or want to understand that part of it, because you just know from data that the chance that they will ever make it is slim, right? So maybe try an approach where you are a bit more selective about who you actually choose to support, based on team and execution power, and not only technology or patent or whatever.
Right, because right now everybody can come with an idea and be supported.
Yeah. And to be honest, that's also really good that they can. But sometimes when you ask a question like, what's the one thing, like if I'm allowed to change one thing that I really could think would make a difference, I think I'll be leaning towards that, because the focus is always on technology, and all this has great promise, and yes, that is true. But if you don't have the team to make it happen, it doesn't happen. It gets stuck somewhere in a drawer or in a lab or something, right? And there is this old saying, right, that a good team, a great team, can succeed with kind of like a mediocre technology, right? But a poor team will almost certainly fail with even the most breakthrough technology, right? So maybe if we believe that, maybe there is an argument for saying that we should focus more on the selection criteria, on actually looking at the people, and their experience, their ability to really take it all the way.
This is a great final note. Thank you so much for today's discussion. That's it for today's episode of Walk the Valley. My conversation with Mads highlighted something we often overlook in healthcare innovation: the people and the team behind the product. From building complementary skills early to working in parallel in both product and commercialization, to having a realistic funding and execution strategy, the message is clear. A great team can carry even a modest technology forward, but even the best tech won't survive without the right team. We also touched on a crucial mindset shift: resilience. Startups need more than ideas. They need founders and teams prepared for setbacks, ready to adapt, and willing to plan for difficult scenarios from day one. You can listen to Walk the Valley on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Be sure to subscribe for more stories about the tough but rewarding journey through healthcare innovation. If you enjoyed the episode, leave us a review. It makes a huge difference. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep walking the valley.